check with you later. Call to order. We'll go through Stephanie will take us through the COVID protocol from the clerk's office. Stephanie?
Thank you, Councillor Starr. Good morning. I'm going to provide a very shortened protocol for electronic participation in this committee meeting. I'm going to provide recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. The committee chair or I will call for any objections. If you have an objection, indicate your name and objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. If you are participating electronically and leaving the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca to indicate that you are leaving the meeting. If you leave the meeting for any votes thereafter, you will be marked as absent. If you would like to request to speak, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca or click on the hand raise button on your screen. We will now proceed with the meeting with a roll call. Please indicate your presence by responding here when called upon. Councillor Dillon? He's not in yet. Councillor Fortini? Okay. Councillor Fortini?
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Councillor Groves?
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Yanika is in the chamber. Councillor Innes?
Good morning, happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, thank you. Councillor Kovac?
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Councillor Mahoney?
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Councillor Paleshi? Good morning, Councillor Paleshi, can you hear us?
Good morning, yes.
Thank you, you're noted as present, thank you.
Thank
Councillor Ras?
Present. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Councillor Sinclair?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Starr is present as well.
Present.
I will now pass the meeting back to Councillor Starr. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing no hands being waved, approval of the agenda. Are there any suggestions of change, updates? Seeing none, moved by Councillor Mahoney. I saw you blink. All those in favor? Carried. We don't have any delegations this morning, but we do have under item 5, 2 reports, and 5152, and normally will bring us through the first one, which is a transition of the Blue Box program. Norm, are you out there someplace?
Yes, I am. If the clerk can load the presentation. There it is. I've got it on my screen. Does everybody have it on theirs? Yep, I'm seeing nods. So before I get started, and good morning, everybody. Before I get started, I just want to say I think this is really a good news story today on the Blue Box program. Municipalities, including Peel, have been asking the province to move the Blue Box program to full producer responsibility for, I can't even count the number of years anymore that we've been pushing for this, or the number of meetings we've gone to with the ministry and other groups. And this is a regulation that's going to make it happen. So it's pretty good. And it includes, I think, a lot of the things that Peel has been asking for, which is also good. But we have to remember this is a draft regulation, not the final one. So we can't take the foot off the gas just yet. Another couple of months until we see the final regulation. But all in all, the good news story, and I think everybody is aware that once transitioned, Peel will see over $15 million a year in savings and avoided costs. So another reason to be excited about this. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background. On October 19th, the ministry released the draft regulation. There was a 45-day comment period, which ends on December the 3rd. And as I said, this is a regulation that will transition the blue box to producers. Today's presentation is really about the comments that Peel will make on December 3rd. Next slide, please. So you'll recall that Peel had requested a transition date of October 1st, 2024 to coincide with the end of our current collection contracts. The ministry considered that request along with the request of other municipalities for their preferred transition dates. They considered tonnage, cost, and geographic locations in making their decisions. And you'll see on the slide that Peel was slotted into 2024 for its transition, which is good. The ministry is working to refine the times within the year, and we're continuing to work with the ministry on that to get our preferred date of October 1st, 2024. Next slide, please. One area of interest to Peel is the list of designated items in the blue box, and the draft reg expands the list of designated items with new items to be added once the program is transitioned in 2026, once all municipalities have transitioned. So the new items include unprinted paper. So if you think of your printer, if you buy a package of printer paper at the store and bring it home, that's unprinted paper. If you print on it yourself, it's technically not eligible to go in the blue box. All municipalities accept it, but it just doesn't get funding from producers. So that will now be something that's supposed to go in there. Single-use packaging like products, foils, wraps, trays, boxes, bags. Tin foil, if it comes wrapping as a package wrapping some product, it's technically in the blue box. But if it's just tin foil out of a tin foil package, it's not. So those will be added. And then some single-use items like straws, cutlery, and so on will be added. So staff supports the list of materials, but will recommend, and I guess the one thing that I should say, compostables is also now a designated item. So if you have compostable cutlery, that sort of thing, compostable coffee pods, they are designated, but the ministry hasn't set any targets for collection or management of those, which I'll talk about a bit later. So we support the list of materials, but we will recommend that they apply management targets to the compostables as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Another area of interest is the list of eligible sources. And you'll recall that Peel had asked the minister a few months ago to designate long-term care homes, schools, parks, and public spaces as eligible sources. The draft reg does include those sources, but it excludes a few sources that Peel currently collects from. So the way it's set up is, if these sources, and this is the column on the left, if these sources are currently collected, and they are by Peel, permanent seasonal dwellings, that's residents, multi-res buildings, public and private schools, we currently collect from those, so they're in, long-term care homes, retirement homes, and some public spaces. So basically parks, playgrounds that are currently collected by Peel, and some BIAs. Buildings, if they're not currently collected by the municipality, they will be added in 2026. That's other multi-residential buildings, and I'm not aware of any in Peel that fall into that category. Any long-term care homes that aren't collected by the municipality, retirement homes and schools. And a lot of municipalities don't currently collect from those sources, so they will get added in 2026. The ones that are a bit of concern to me are ones that are going to be ineligible: places of worship, nonprofit organization, the indoor portion of public spaces. So if we have regional facilities, libraries, arenas, and so on, The outdoor area could be eligible, but not the indoor. So the litter bin outside would be eligible, but not the indoor. And of course, the commercial component of BIAs, which get collected in a lot of places. So we will certainly comment on that. We think those should be, but generally, though, we do support the list. It's an improvement over previous proposals, and we will advocate that it not be shortened in the final regulation. Next slide, please. Servicing requirements is just the draft regulation sets out rules on how the producers will have to service these areas. It talks about the type of collection, minimum collection frequency, provision of receptacles and replacement of them, and it maintains that recycling be as accessible and convenient as garbage collection. So staff support the servicing requirements and will advocate that the ministry maintain them in the final regulation, that there's no backsliding on them. Next slide, please. The common collection system, that's the phrase that the ministry is using to refer to the new blue box system. It proposes, the regulation proposes that pros establish a common collection system to collect a consistent set of materials from all eligible sources. So across the entire province, the blue box program would be common in all municipalities. Producers have the option also to establish alternative collection systems, things like deposit return or return to retail. The biggest deposit return program in Ontario right now is the beer store program and the LCBO program. Other entities may choose to do that. Return to retail. Grocery stores may decide the best thing for grocery bags is to return them to the store. So those types of programs could be started by producers as well. And so Peel supports the common collection system. The one thing we will seek clarification from the ministry on is just competition and any barriers to entry to competition. As Peel has long advocated for the system to be designed in a way that allows fair and open competition throughout the system. And we'll continue to advocate for that, just to make sure there's no barriers to competition. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this is the current program. One of the biggest problems with it is that it's run by a monopoly, and that's been causing all sorts of challenges throughout the system. So we and other stakeholders want to make sure that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in the new system. Next slide, please. These are the proposed recovery targets in the draft regulation, and I've got to apologize. In the report itself, we added a column that shows the current diversion rate in Ontario, and I forgot to do it in this slide deck. So I'll just read off for you. So things like paper, the current recovery rate is 72%. That goes up to 90. Rigid plastic, the current recovery rate is 48%, goes up to 55, and then 60 a few years later. Flexible plastic, the current recovery rate is 7%, goes up to 30. Glass, current is 68%, goes up to 75. Metal, the current recovery rate is 54%. And non-alcoholic beverage does not have a current program, so it has no current recovery rate. It's just whatever type of material they're made of, they would fall into those things. So these are targets that are higher than what we're currently seeing in Ontario. They're measured generally the same way, and according to the ministry, these are some of the highest in North America. So staff will again advocate for the inclusion of a target for compostable materials, and we'll also advocate that these targets not be lowered. Next slide, please. responsible producers, I think we've talked about this quite a bit, and the draft regulation did not include any surprises. There's a cascading hierarchy. If you produce something in Ontario, you're the producer. If it's produced outside of Ontario, it's basically whoever imports it into Ontario is the producer. And if the importer seems to also be outside Ontario, then it's the retailer becomes the producer. There's a threshold, there's a mechanism to capture online retailer, online sales as well. So that will be covered. That's a big thing these days. And there's a threshold that exempts small businesses to minimize the burden on small businesses. So again, staff supports the proposed hierarchy, and I don't think there's any pushback from any sectors against that. Next slide, please. So next steps, as I said, the comment period is December 3rd. Staff will certainly submit appeals comments by September 3rd, and then we will bring those back to committee in the new year for you to see what we submitted. There are ongoing meetings with the ministry staff and with other stakeholders to address some of the issues, get clarifications, and to continue advocating for positions that support appeals priorities. Next slide, please. The biggest risk that I see between now and the final regulation is if producers are able to convince the province to reduce the requirements in the regulation, whether it's fewer designated material, fewer designated sources of material, or lower targets. So staff will continue to engage with the ministry to do our best to maintain what's in the regulation now. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time. I welcome any comments or questions.
Councillor Starr, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was talking to myself. If you can, Councilman Mahoney's laughing. He says, "I've seen that before." Yeah, it's either raise your hand electronically or wave at me. The one thing before I forget, Norm, maybe you can include in your chart for the council meeting the current recovery rates. I think that's very interesting to have that comparison, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize for that. It's in the report itself, just not in the presentation.
Okay, I have a list here. Councillor Sinclair.
Yeah, just a general question. How much time are field staff spending on this? It looks like it's a huge amount of preoccupation.
I don't have an exact number, but huge is the number I would use. I have one staff member who is spending probably 90% of his time on it. Another staff that spends at least 25% of his time on it. And then probably, a half a dozen or so other staff who help out. I myself have been spending a considerable amount of time on this. You recall the ministry set up a mediation process with an advisor a few years ago that included a meeting a week for, I think there were 9 or 10 meetings, and that was basically a full-time job for me to manage those and to be prepared for each meeting. Following that, the ministry set up some stakeholder working groups that I had joined, and again, it was almost a full-time job to do that. In fact, just before the pandemic hit this spring, I have a letter sitting on my desk right now because I haven't moved it, from the commissioner that would actually move me out of the director's role into a blue box transition role for a period of a year. So it's taken that much work. It's been a lot of work, but it's an important program, and as I said, it's $15 million a year, so we want to make sure we maximize that.
Okay, next question is the classification of compostables. Is there any indication of what the breakdown time is for a compostable? You know, they can add up to quite a volume before they break down.
You were cutting in and out a little bit there, but the gist of the question, if I heard it, was what's the cost implications of compostables? And they could be significant, and there's still a lot of discussions going on with the province about compostables. Things like compostable coffee pots, compostable cutlery, and such. Producers would love for those just to be added to the green bin, but unfortunately, they don't compost as quickly as food does, and they don't compost as quickly as yard waste does. So the ones that do get in there now, and we get a few of them, at the end of our process, if we're fortunate, they get screened out as residue. And if we're unfortunate, they remain in the compost and go to the customer. So that's a bit of a problem. We're trying to work through that. One of the reasons municipalities have asked for them to be designated so that if there is a cost associated with it, producers would have to bear that cost if they choose to market these types of items as compostable. The one thing, and we've clarified this with the ministry, and they're going to make sure it's clear in the final regulation. Recyclable items like paper, which are also compostable, will not be considered compostable in this definition. The expectation is that they continue to be recycled.
Okay. Next question. Thank you for that. There is a mention about, this is in the report, ensure that small businesses are not burdened by the Blue Box program transition. So my immediate question was, who will be burdened by it? Are they going to participate and not include it? And therefore it ends up in the waste stream and therefore on the property tax base?
I think no. It will be other producers that would be burdened, because the producers will pay the cost of managing the Blue Box. So, you have large producers that are paying into the program and their products go in it. A small producer who's exempt would not pay into the program, but they're still selling their products to residents, and the residents could still throw those in the Blue Box just as they do any other. If a small business sells a glass of juice or a jar of juice, that jar would still be eligible to go into the Blue Box, and residents would throw those in, and I assume the same percentage that they do everything else. So it's really the producers that would be burdened by that right now, or will be under the new regulation.
All right. Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other hands up. Two quick questions, Norm.
Sorry, Councillor Stark. Councillor Innes is raising her hand.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Chair Stark. Just to follow up on the heels of questions for the compostable. I know that we had put in the previous motion that was sent to council with regards to plastics about encouraging a standard to be set for the compostable product. Are we going to be taking any further steps to advocate on that, either potentially or federally or wherever that responsibility should lie?
We are, and again, sorry, you were breaking up a little bit, and I think the question was, are we continuing to advocate for standards to be set for compostable products and such? And we definitely are. We want the standard to be kind of Canada-wide if possible, and certainly Ontario-wide. But if a product is marketed as compostable, that it actually is in a real-life composting system, not in some laboratory somewhere. So we're advocating for that, and we're again advocating for producers to set up some sort of commercial composting system for any hard to compost items, and that they not be kind of put into the municipal program. So I think, and I think we have a report coming back to committee in the new year on dealing more with kind of compostable items and things like that. That just we'll talk a little bit more detail about this.
Thank you. Great work, Norm and team. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other hands, and let me check electronically. I don't see hands. No. Quick question. Norm.
Sorry, Councillor Starr. Chair Yanika would like to ask a question.
He's not allowed. Go ahead, Chair Yanika.
Ron, thank you. And I bet it's the same question that the Chair Starr had. In the evolution going forward of mixed waste, seeing what our European friends do, waste from energy, et cetera, how might this bump up against that? So in other words, if we're getting to the generation where mixed waste, put it at the curb, one bag, we'll look after everything, we'll derive refuse from fuel, et cetera, do we now say, but we're not responsible for somebody else is taking that away? And does that mean there's this fork in the road that the two will never meld again? Or can it be made to work? So it just came into my head now, Norm. Any thoughts on how, if those evolutionary paths carry on, how this might encumber them, how they can work in tandem, et cetera?
Sure, and I think they can work quite well in tandem, but it's a bit of both. I mean, producers will be responsible for setting up a collection system for paper and packaging. So, residential buildings will have that, and some parks, public spaces, schools will have that. That'll be the law that they have to do it. If we, municipalities will still be responsible for organics and garbage. And if we set up a mixed waste processing system and I should say that even with the Blue Box program, there are still recyclables in the garbage. We know that in curbside and multi-residential buildings. So if we set up a system with mixed waste that takes out the organics and recovers those last few recyclables, we'll be able to negotiate with producers to kind of not really sell them, but in effect sell them the recyclables that we recover through mixed waste processing to help them meet their targets if they need to, if they need more recyclables to meet their targets, that sort of thing. So I think the two can definitely work together, and if the targets are high enough, producers will pay for the portion of the recyclable material that we're able to extract from garbage.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that was one of the things that I was going to talk about, the one-stop drop-off, one-stop recycling. And it brings me to my point. Just contamination.
It's 10 o'clock.
Do you have any idea at this point what sort of contamination we experience, if you had a column there with the various items?
In the Blue Box itself, yeah. we are getting very close to 30% contamination right now. So 30% of what residents put into the Blue Box should be somewhere else, and that gets separated out and sent to landfill at the facility, obviously. And it costs money to do that, so it's a very expensive proposition when residents put garbage or non-recyclable things in the Blue Box. Now, somewhere between of that 30%, 10% at least, and up to 15% sometimes is non-recyclable packaging. Some packaging that's just not eligible right now. So in the future, those items would be designated, because all packaging will be designated. So I guess technically they wouldn't be contamination, so the contamination rate would go down.
Yeah, and I think that still remains a problem because even on a personal note, and there's so many different types of plastics, hard, the rigid ones, the soft ones, you take a look and you take a look for a symbol someplace, and sometimes there's no symbol, which brings me to my final question. Imported products and imported packaging, for instance, from different countries, is there a universal standard so that if I buy a product that in a bottle from a different country, or hard plastics. I mean, where does that fit? Does anybody have any ideas on how much, or is there a contamination from that end, or do they follow the rigid standards we're trying to follow? Kind of a convoluted question, but it always worries me when I see something else from a different country, and because we're so diverse, and the supermarkets, there are so many products that aren't manufactured here.
Yes and no. There's definitely some differences across the country. You know, a glass jar is a glass jar, and glass is glass, and it's just as recyclable. You know, if it comes from Ontario or somewhere else. Some of the differences that we see, you know, we have very standard labeling in our recycling system. We have the Mobius loop. In Europe, they have a slightly different loop of arrows. So sometimes you'll get a package from outside of Canada, and the little symbol on it that looks like a recycling loop is different, and that sometimes confuses people. The other thing we're finding is the major retailers in Ontario agreed a number of years ago to make all of the clamshell packages out of polyethylene. So these are these plastic packages that you get berries and sometimes salad in. They're rigid packaging. So they agreed that it was a problem to have them made of different materials, and they agreed to make them all out of polyethylene so they would be much more recyclable. There are some products come in from outside of Ontario in very similar looking packages that are made of a different material, polystyrene, right? That it's a problem because that now becomes a contaminant. So yeah, there is some challenges worldwide where different standards are used, or where people just don't adhere to the standards and give lower quality items.
Okay, that answered my question. Any other questions from anybody? I'm trying to go on here electronically. I don't see any hands up. I don't see any waving, except to say hello. Okay, Councillor Sinclair, will you move the report receipt? All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Norm. Good presentation.
Councillor Starr, there is a
Yes?
recommendation in Norm's report. I can read it, or if there are any objections to the main motion outlined in the report, I can read it if you like.
Would everybody like to have that read quickly, or have you all read it? I assume that was part of it, Stephanie.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, so that's part of the motion. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up, keeping us online. Okay, Norm, on to 5.2, which is the Waste Management Services update.
Okay, so again, if the clerk can bring up the presentation. I can now see it on my screen. Can other people see it on theirs?
Yes.
I see some heads nodding.
Yep.
So this presentation, before I start, it deals with 3 specific services and service changes. It deals with the 2 free bags that residents are allowed to put out at the curb. It deals with the 100 kilograms that people get to drop off for free at CRCs. And it deals with the January exemption period coming up in the new year. And just the clerk can maybe help us out if we need on this, but what we're looking for today, I'll go through the presentation, and it includes some kind of recommended direction at the end. We're asking for the committee to endorse the direction. And if the committee does endorse the direction, a motion would be presented at council to approve the direction. And the reason that motion has to go to council is because council made the original, set the original direction on the 2 free bags and the CRC fee. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. So just a little bit of background on these three items. In March of 2020, Council directed staff, or gave staff delegated authority to the Commissioner to suspend any number of services, including the exemption periods that we have during the year for garbage. But in doing so, they asked staff to consider having an exemption period when it would be kind of prudent to do so. So they were okay with suspending them during the COVID pandemic, but asked that we consider having one. And you'll see as we get into the presentation on that staff is intending to suspend also the January exemption period. In April of 2020, Council directed staff to waive the requirement for bag tags and allow 2 extra bags of garbage every garbage day for residents, and also to waive CRC fees. And then in June, they changed the CRC one a little bit by saying up to 100 kilograms would be free at CRCs, and after that, residents would pay. So next slide, please. I'm going to work through these a little bit backwards. I'm going to start with the CRC fees. They were waived in April to give residents an outlet for extra waste generated while working from home and to prevent illegal dumping. And of course, as I said, in June, it was brought down to 100 kilograms. You know, the waive fees really did serve their purpose initially, and it let residents have an outlet. But we're finding now, our data is showing that they're really being taken advantage of by some commercial customers to get cheaper loads brought in, and by a few residents who are returning often with smaller loads. Which ends up creating longer lineups for all of the customers. And the revenue loss of this one is pretty significant, 3.6 million to date, and projected to be over 4 million by the end of the year. And next year, we're actually, when we kind of created the budget submission for next year, we included revenue for this, so that would be a budget adjustment if it continues into next year. So next slide, please. These are just a couple of graphs. This one shows the number of users coming to our CRCs, and you can see it went up quite a bit when COVID hit, and when council waived the fees. Next slide, please. This one shows the inbound tonnage. Shows a similar pattern, but the difference between the two, the number of users went up by 24%, and the number of tonnage went up by only 16%, which tells us more people are coming in with small loads to avoid or to take advantage of the fee. Next slide, please. So our considerations for reinstating it. They were waived early when residents were at home generating more waste, and it certainly served that need. I think it's been met, and they're returning to work and school. The waive fees are now driving increased usage by contractors. We are seeing a lot of C&D material as well, construction and demolition material coming in. It's a significant cost in doing so. The budget, of course, includes this revenue. And just on the timing, the public has to be informed of any fee changes. So that came into one of our considerations. Next slide, please. So the staff recommendation is that CRC fees be reinstated effective January 4th, 2021, which allows time to communicate the change. So that's effectively January 1st, but I think the 4th is the first Monday in January, the first day they're open. Next slide, please. On to the 2 free bags at the curb. Again, it served its purpose initially, allowing residents to dispose of extra garbage while working at home and while their kids were at home. Residents now seem to have settled into a routine. The number of bags set out each week is in line with the number set out pre-COVID, although slightly higher. Historically, about 1.5% of residents would set out extra bags with tags on them, and we're now seeing about 2% of residents doing that. This one also has a cost. It's about $360,000 for the year, so certainly much less than the CRC fee cost. Next slide, please. So again, the considerations. Council allowed the bags early in the pandemic to provide an outlet for residents generating more waste, and it certainly has served that purpose. The extra bag set out is now consistent with pre-pandemic set out, although slightly higher, but not much higher, and it's certainly leveled off. 98% of residents are effectively subsidizing the set out of the other 2%. 2021 budget includes bag tag revenue. Staff recommend reinstating it for all those reasons. But effective February 8th, just to offset it by at least a month from the CRC reinstatement. And again, residents would be informed well in advance. Next slide, please. The staff recommendation then would be that the 2-bag allowance for garbage remain in place until February 8th, 2021, which allows time for communication of changes. Next slide. On the exemption period, with the 2-bag allowance, curbside collection of bulky items certainly reduced the need for exemption period in January. And staff is still concerned about maintaining the integrity of the collection system. You'll all recall that when we have an exemption period, there's a lot of waste tends to get set out, and it really overloads the collection workers. The other thing we're finding is residents are starting to get much better at setting out bulky waste on their regular garbage day than they used to. They've always been allowed to do that, but most residents tended to wait until exemption day and set it out on that day. But with some communications that we've had and throughout the pandemic, residents have been getting better at setting it out just on their regular day. So taking all those things together, staff intends to suspend the January exemption period. As we've been, given authority by council to do, and we will inform them of that suspended period well in advance. Next slide, please. So the next steps, this will go to, I say November 26th Regional Council. There is now a question. It might go to November 26th or December 3rd now that we have a new council meeting there. So the intent, as I said, council has to approve the recommendation. So I would give a very brief, or staff would give a very brief verbal update and request regional council to adopt a motion to reinstate the recycling fees and to reinstate the need for bag tags. If the motion is approved, staff would implement a communication strategy for both of those. Next slide, please. With that, I will welcome your questions.
Thank you, Norm. And the first one on the list I see is Councillor Rass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation and update, Norm. And I actually support the recommendations. I think when we were in a time when everybody was home back in March and April, there was certainly a lot of purging taking place. And I think for the most part that has been done. And the fact that we will, if we're headed down the road of another potential lockdown period, we might see a little bit of that over the coming weeks. But the fact that this wouldn't come into play until February, I think It'll give us as councillors an opportunity to communicate with our residents. And I think when we do that update, getting that information out about the bulky waste piece and when they're able to set it out during regular time so they don't have to wait, I think is a really good message to reinforce. And lastly, on the bag tag purchases or purchasing the bag tags, assuming we're still in, of course, we're going to be in the pandemic situation, but trying to minimize contacts, is there a no contact purchase option for bag tags? How is that going to work?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We have, right now, we have online sales of bag tags, and that is an option that's available. In fact, we've stopped selling them in person while we were still selling them at the beginning of the pandemic. We had a report recently, I think, where we said we're going to continue to encourage online sales, and we certainly have that option available, and we're going to encourage people to do that.
Okay. Over the last couple of months, especially, I've seen a lot fewer garbage bags being put out. So the people that might sneak the odd bag or two into their neighbors' bins, they're just leaving them out. But it's certainly a lot less than what it was previous. And for the contractors, it's they're taking advantage of the taxpayers by doing that extra dumping. And I know that when a lot of people do those that work, the contractors charge the residents for the dumping fees. But I don't know if that's still going on right now. I support the recommendations. Happy to move it today, Mr. Chair, and I can also do that at Regional Council and speak to it then. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to look at my electronic list. I don't see anybody on there. Is there anybody waving?
None.
I don't see any.
No other speakers.
No other speakers. Okay, it's been moved, the report and the recommendation to go to council as indicated by the overall report by Councillor Rass. All those in favor? Those opposed? Seeing none, carried. And moving on to communications, we have a letter from the president of AMO dated October 26th and talking about the blue box transition. Receipt, Councillor Innes. All those in favor? Or I'm sorry, anybody want to speak to it at all? Don't see anything. Okay. All in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Do I have any other business from any member of the committee? I don't see any. We don't have any in the camera items, and the next meeting will be on Thursday, January 21st in the new year. If that's not suitable for everybody, let us know way ahead of time. Move adjournment.
Move adjournment, Mr. Chair, and I don't think any of us are going to be in Florida at that time, so we'll be here.
You never know. It could be a complete lift.
Yeah, it's a miracle.
A miracle. These have happened. Water's turned to wine. Remember that. So all those in favor of adjournment, those opposed, carried. Have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you. Good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all.